When LA Noire hit shelves in 2011, it didn't feel like just another release, it felt like a glimpse of the future. At the center of it all was MotionScan, a hulking machine of cameras and lights that captures actors with unnerving precision. For players, that meant interrogations weren't just about choosing dialogue options, they were about watching a suspect sweat, catching the flicker in their eyes, the tremor in their voice. And in that moment, LA Noire seemed bigger than itself. It wasn't just a detective story set in post-war Los Angeles. It was a technological landmark, a claim that video games could finally meet cinema on its own terms. The marketing leaned hard into that promise, saying the technology as revolutionary. But revolutions have a cost. And the story of LA Noire isn't just about innovation, it's about a studio that burned itself down, chasing it. The story of Team Bondi starts with one man, Brandon McNamara. By the early 2000s, McNamara already had a reputation in the industry. At Sony's London studio, he had directed The Getaway, a 2002 open-world crime drama often described as Sony's answer to Grand Theft Auto. The reviews were mixed, but the ambition was unmistakable. It recreated London in its painstaking detail, wrapped in a cinematic tone that wore its movie influences on its sleeve. Looking back, you can see the blueprint of McNamara's obsessions: authenticity, scale, and the belief that games could be more like film. After The Getaway, McNamara left Sony and went home to Sydney. There in 2003 he founded Team Bondi. The name came from the famous Sydney beach. But the studio's ambitions were never just Australian. From day one, McNamara pitched Bondi as a developer that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Rockstar, Ubisoft, or Sony's biggest internal teams. Almost immediately, the seed of LA Noire was planted. McNamara wanted to build a game set in post-war Los Angeles, drenched in noir aesthetics and built around detective work instead of gunfights. It would be an interactive crime drama, not just another open-world shooter. The pitch caught Sony's attention. The PlayStation 3 looming, they were hungry for exclusives that could show off the console's power. And LA Noire, with its promise of cinematic authenticity, looked like the perfect prestige project. But even those early days, the cracks were already forming. McNamara's vision was massive, but maybe too massive for a brand new studio. The more Bondi leaned on outside backing, the more its future would be tied to demands of its partners. In 2003 though, those promises were still invisible. All anyone could see was the promise. A visionary director, a bold new studio, and the dream of a game that could change the medium. Brandon McNamara and his Sydney team weren't just trying to make a game, they were chasing a reputation. They wanted to be a studio that pushed animation, storytelling, performance into uncharted territory. The problem was clear: if LA Noire was going to live or die on interrogations, then suddenly it had to be more than an artistic flourish. It had to be mechanic. And in the mid-2000s, standard animation pipelines just weren't up to the task. Traditional motion capture could capture broad movements, sure, but the tiny details, a twitch at the corner of the mouth, an eye that doesn't quite meet yours, those were lost in translation. For a detective game where players needed to read faces, that failure wasn't acceptable. The answer was MotionScan. Developed with a company co-founded by McNamara and his brother, it was much a machine as it was a stage. 32 high-definition cameras circling an actor, capturing every flicker of expression from every angle at once. Instead of asking animators to approximate humanity, MotionScan pulled the performance directly into the game. The results were staggering. Nearly 400 actors sat in a contraption, their faces scanned into one of the largest casts gaming had ever seen. What players got wasn't a facsimile of a performance, it was a performance itself. Idiosyncrasies intact. For scholars of digital media, this was a watershed moment. Games long used to stylized exaggeration suddenly had characters whose micro-expression felt indistinguishable from film. But that fidelity came with its own strange limitations. Actors performed in an alien environment, boxed in by cameras, their bodies useless because only their heads were recorded. The rest, every shrug, every restless shuffle, had to be captured separately and stitched on afterwards. It was a kind of Frankenstein process. Facial truth welded to digital bodies. Sometimes the seams showed. Still, when it worked, it felt like witchcraft. Critics would later call the effect hyper-real, unsettling in its closeness to reality. McNamara framed it as nothing less than a reinvention of interactive narrative. The first time a player could tell truth from lies simply by watching a digital face. But MotionScan, dazzling as it was, carried a cost in time, money, and pressure that would eventually swallow the very studio that created it. Because inside Team Bondi it felt more like a slow motion collapse. What began in 2004 as a prestiged Sony project stretched into one of the longest and most brutal development cycles in modern gaming. Former employees described the same story again and again. Endless crunch, work weeks of 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 sometimes 7 days straight. And not for a few weeks at the end of production, for months, even years. Brendan McNamara's perfectionism became infamous. Every shot, every system, every line of dialogue could be torn apart and rebuilt if it didn't meet his standards. For workers, the project stopped being about building something ambitious, it became about surviving him. The culture only made things worse. Team Bondi was built on hierarchy and fear, with little regard for balance or recognition. Staff who left mid-project often discovered their names had been erased from the credits. Years of their careers wiped away in an industry where credits are currency. For many, the greatest crime wasn't exhaustion, but erasure and exploitation. In hindsight, it wasn't just background noise. The crunch, the mismanagement, the broken promises, they weren't side effects of LA Noire's development. They were the cracks in the foundation. And when the final game finally launched, those cracks were already too deep to ignore. At first, LA Noire had a powerful ally. Sony backed the project, but as the years dragged on, progress was slow. Budgets swelled and patience thinned. By 2006, Sony had quietly had enough. They stepped away, sliding the project across the table to a new partner, Rockstar Games and Take-Two Interactive. For Team Bondi, Rockstar was both rescuer and creditor. They brought money, stability and the infrastructure of a global studio network. Rockstar North, San Diego and Leeds all lent a hand. Without them, LA Noire might never have seen daylight. But salvation came with strings. Rockstar had its own reputation, a studio empire famous for control, precision and the kind of secrecy that turned every release into an event. Bondi, on the other hand, was still a small Sydney outfit, run by McNamara's uncompromising vision. From the beginning, the two sides bristled. Communications broke down across continents, deadlines slipped, creative choices sparked friction. And then there was the matter of credit. Rockstar curated its games as cultural moments, carefully folding them into its brand identity. McNamara, by contrast, wanted the spotlight on MotionScan and on Team Bondi. He pushed against Rockstar's dominance in marketing, sometimes loudly. To Rockstar executives, he wasn't just difficult, he was a liability. By the time LA Noire finally shipped, Rockstar cut ties almost immediately, making it clear they would never work with McNamara again. For Rockstar, LA Noire was a success bought at a steep cost. For Team Bondi, it marked the beginning of the end. In May 2011, after nearly 7 years of sweat and turmoil, LA Noire finally saw the light of day. The industry met it with something rare, admiration mixed with sheer relief. Critics hailed it as bold leap forward, a detective game that felt more like a living, breathing film noir. Its meticulous recreation of post-war Los Angeles, its atmosphere thick with cigarette smoke and neon lights, and above all its uncanny faces all earned praise. The cultural splash was undeniable. LA Noire became the first video game ever featured at the Tribeca Film Festival, a signal that it wanted to be judged not just as entertainment but as art, shoulder to shoulder with cinema. Commercially too, it hit hard. It shot to the top of sales charts across multiple regions and moved millions of copies in its opening weeks. On paper it looked like a triumph, but the applause came with caveats. Beneath the technical wizardry critics showed, the core loop, drive, investigate, interrogate, repeat began to feel rigid, more constrained than the sweeping freedom suggested in the marketing. The interrogation system, the crown jewel of MotionScan, sometimes left players frustrated, punishing them for misreading what seemed like the right cues. For all its brilliance, the gameplay didn't always match the ambition. And behind the curtain, another story played out. Team Bondi had built the game, pioneered the technology, and poured years into its making. But when the lights came up, Rockstar's shadow loomed over everything. The marketing branded LA Noire as a Rockstar release, packaging it alongside Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. For many players, the name Team Bondi barely registered. Even in its moment of triumph, the studio was already disappearing from its own success. The release of LA Noire was a paradox, a high water mark that proved what games could achieve, and at the same time the beginning of an erasure, a victory with no one left to celebrate it. And the glow didn't last. Not long after LA Noire's release, the story started leaking out. The testimonies and accounts of crunch and erasure. The game once hailed as a cultural triumph was suddenly reframed as a cautionary tale, its artistry overshadowed by the human cost of its creation. McNamara tried to pivot. For a moment there was talk of salvation in the form of Kennedy Miller Mitchell, George Miller's production company, the creative force behind Mad Max. The idea was bold, fold Team Bondi into a multimedia studio that could bridge film and games under one roof. For a brief flicker it looked like a lifeline, but reputations don't heal overnight, the backlash lingered, the finances ran dry, and the goodwill of the industry had long since evaporated. Whatever chances remained slipped away. By the end of 2011, Team Bondi was gone, liquidated and scattered, leaving behind only its one great work, and the wreckage it took to make it. After the collapse of Team Bondi, Brendan McNamara didn't vanish. He resurfaced with a smaller outfit, Video Game Deluxe, still chasing performance-driven storytelling. In 2017, the studio returned briefly to familiar ground with LA Noire the VR case files, a handful of cases rebuilt for virtual reality. McNamara has hinted at other projects since, but none have carried the same weight. This name remains forever bound to both the ambition and the controversy of LA Noire. As for MotionScan, the great innovation, the technology that promised a revolution, it failed almost as quickly as it arrived. The system was too expensive, too cumbersome, and too disconnected from full-body performance. Within a few years, the industry had moved on, embracing integrated performance capture that was cheaper, faster, and more flexible. And so the story of Team Bondi ends, with LA Noire remaining a landmark, proof of what games could aspire to. But the studio that built it collapsed under the weight of its own vision, consumed the very fire it lit.